Welcome to a new series of CoinGeek Conversations. To kick it off, Dr. Craig Wright finally signs as Satoshi. I don't know what all the fuss was about. In this show, Dr. Wright talks about crypto regulation, N-chain's strategy, libel, and AI.
You're listening to CoinGeek Conversations with Charles Miller.
Craig, you've started a new series of Bitcoin masterclasses, 2 days each, and there's a whole series of them coming up. The first one happened last week in London. What's the idea behind that?
Okay, so there are a lot of topics that have been misrepresented and are misunderstood within Bitcoin and sort of the concept of how blockchain works generally. The first one was about privacy, confidentiality, and even touched anonymity. And these topics have been twisted into meaning something that they aren't.
So who did you have in mind? Who do you think the audience is for these workshops?
People who are entrepreneurs, developers, people involved with Bitcoin, blockchain, etc. in some way. What I want to do is get people to start understanding the capacity and capability of the system, how they can develop different areas. So in the one just the other week, we covered off concepts of privacy and how Bitcoin can be private. Now, having identity and traceability, people put that together and think you end up with utopia, a sort of dystopian system of Orwell where everyone's known and everything is traced, and we end up with social credits like the Chinese government want to implement. But the reality here is, as you scale Bitcoin, it becomes more and more private because of the number of transactions that you have to sort through. And although you still have traceability, you also have privacy. And it becomes analogous to physical notes. So the serial number in a note is rather private, but it's still traceable. When you go to a bank or an ATM, they have the notes ordered. They take photos of the notes in ATMs, and they've been used in solving crimes in the past. So if you can solve a murder using the serial number on a physical note, then it means there is a link that is not anonymous.
That was a very interesting little thing that I learned. Really didn't have anything to do with Bitcoin, but it made me think so that if a criminal is caught with a whole bunch of cash, then his sort of customers, as it were, can be identified if at least somewhere in the chain between the cash point and the criminal's wallet, because of the serial numbers of each banknote.
Well, movies get some of the things wrong when they talk about marked notes, for instance. People think that there's some sort of marker that will shine up and you can hold a special light and see. Actually, it's far simpler than that. You just write down the serial number. And when the bank gets a note and they scan, computers are very quick these days. OCR will go through and say whether it's a recognized note or not, and then say where it came from. So marked notes don't mean marking the note. You don't need to just scribble on it. That would be too obvious. All you do is you write down the serial number. There's only one of those that's unique.
Interesting. You used to be a lecturer. And I got the feeling you kind of rather enjoyed this format. There's the audience has to answer questions, and it's sort of like, does it kind of bring you back to the good old days when you were a university lecturer?
Yeah, it does. It reminds me, I did some like teaching at the New South Wales Police Academy in the past, and sort of sat there with a bunch of either sort of upskilling cops or trainee cops, and as well as other people who were just in Charles Sturt.
What were you teaching them?
I was actually doing law. I was doing sort of an intro legal course.
Some of the questions that you threw out to the audience were very difficult, I thought. I mean, for instance, I caught, how big is my TCP header in IPv6? Now, there was a lot of sort of just awkward looking around and shuffling.
Of course, that's a trick question in a way, because you can say there's a minimum header size, but with variable header conditions in IPv6, it could actually be a sliding scale. So.
Oh, right. I looked it up on Google, and I was going, if you'd asked me after I looked it up in Google, I would have said 40 bytes, but it was a trick question because it's only 20 in IPv4.
Yeah, IPv4 is far smaller. So
right. Of course, there is plenty of opportunity to hear you talk about Bitcoin. Ryan X. Charles's videos come to approximately 60 hours of you talking to him. And then you've got Xiao Liu, 23 videos of 23 hours of that. More is better, of course, but there's not exactly a shortage of explanation from you about Bitcoin.
Well, yes and no. Some of those other ones, like with Ryan, went into the fundamentals of the white paper. With Xiao Wei, we went into technical topics. So now we're covering other areas that haven't been done.
More of a management and
yeah, and it's also
economic side.
workshopping and trying to get people to think of ideas they can use. So if you're an
Right.
entrepreneur, you want to start a business, maybe a new wallet, how do I do that? How do I have something that differentiates and creates a company that would be valuable because it's different?
To get the sort of Bitcoin message across, you need to straddle the technology at one end and almost economics and a philosophy at the other, and kind of bring them together.
Well, if you look at Bitcoin right back from the white paper, it's a combination of game theory, of statistics, economics, computer science, network science, and a variety of other topics.
So
I did try and stay away from politics, but that doesn't seem to work well because certain people on both sides hijack it.
On the question of political discussion, I liked when you talked about the good old days, well, actually good old days a couple of centuries ago, I think, when people met in coffee shops and had proper debates about things. Arguments don't mean yelling at each other, you say. Well, you do a fair amount of yelling yourself on Twitter and other outlets.
Well, that's not really yelling.
Well, it's the sort of, isn't it the digital equivalent of yelling?
Some of it is, but usually only when there's trolls and you want to shut them down.
For instance, on YouTube with this guy, Crypto Rick, you seemed completely unrestrained in your comments about naming people, actually. Quotes, involved in terrorism, people smuggling and drug dealing, and you named other people scumbags, basically criminals. I mean,
but Binance is. I mean, I was saying back in 2019 that Binance were linked to Hydra and North Korea, and everyone said, "Oh, it's a load of BS. Got no evidence." Blah blah blah. Hydra doesn't even exist. It's all a myth. And just a few weeks ago, of course, a large exchange that are linked to Binance get shut down, and Binance run around going, "Oh, we didn't really know."
But those are libelous comments, aren't they? I mean,
no. Libel is covered by truth.
Well, I mean, what I mean is they're libelous. You could defend yourself with truth,
but it's not libelous if it's true. So technically,
right, you'd be found not guilty. If
therefore, it's not libelous. So,
but you'd have to prove that the people involved had been involved in people smuggling and drug dealing.
No. All I need to do is show that these things go through. As an example, I set up in one day 10,000 email addresses and registered 10,000 accounts on Binance from the US, both in the US and the foreign Binance, where I had a 2 BTC limit. And in theory, their argument is that they have money, AML provisions, but that's $40,000 an account. So that's $400 million a day that I could transfer. And I could have added more accounts.
You mean if you were money laundering?
If I was money laundering.
Yeah.
Now, we also know that my allegations about Hydra and ties to these things that I made years ago are now proven true. So,
right. So you went through a whole experiment to try and demonstrate this to yourself, or? Yeah,
I did. And one of the things that came out later was last year I made accusations about a number of exchanges saying that, can't remember the exact figure, but it was like a very small amount of BTC actually held, because you could look at the money going in and out. And then with the sales, et cetera, they're mostly naked trades, and it was like 5% of the actual BTC. So they had far more BTC on sale than exist. In some of these like FTX and Binance together, there are over 40 million Bitcoin being sold. That's difficult when there's, if you think about it for a moment.
Right.
And even when you account for the same thing being sold in multiple exchanges, like some people argued, it's still too much Bitcoin on the sale.
Right.
And of course, now we know that FTX didn't have it. So, I mean, I said these things. I told people what I did for my methodology and how I did it. And of course, rather than actually validating properly and scientifically, people just go, BS, it can't be. These guys are all good. FTX would never scam us.
Well, today, actually, the UK government has announced it's putting out for consultation some ideas about regulating crypto. What's your attitude to that?
Well, the law actually exists already. So back in 1996, the UNICITRAL provisions from the UN were implemented and adopted by Europe. And of course, part of that meant Britain as well, because we were part of the European Union at that time. So we already have digital currency, digital cash rules. And saying Bitcoin's different, well, it's actually not. So what we need to have is people to understand that the things like promotion rules that cover stocks, shares, bonds, etc., should apply. Going, it's crypto, well, so what?
Yeah, I mean, you've always argued that it should be just thought of as being something that's subject to the ordinary law anyway. So I'm wondering what special provisions should be added, if necessary, for the crypto business, or is it already covered, do you think?
I believe it should already be covered. I mean, we should just actually start applying the rules. And the argument that it's new, that it's online, it's really not. I mean, the UN rules were put in because of all of the cryptocurrency things in the 90s. And this includes web IPOs. And web IPOs were basically a whole ICO type craze where people did the equivalent of listing a company, but sold shares like pink sheets on the internet, and then promised a whole lot of things, to the extent that there's even a Simpsons episode about it.
Right.
And where Bart's working for a startup and he wants to go to the toilet, and they ask where the toilet paper is, and they point and there's a roll of stock.
Right. So ICOs would be covered by that as well.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
The argument there is, oh, but we don't give out dividends, but neither does Facebook. And it's still a share. Right. Dividends aren't necessary.
How would Bitcoin SV be affected by any kind of regulation that you think should be introduced that isn't there now?
Oh, we won't at all. I mean, we've always been sort of working to stay within all of the legal frameworks in this country. So it'll just make our life easier, as everyone else has to now start doing things that we've been doing already.
I wonder whether there's a contradiction between the government saying we want to regulate crypto in the UK and we want to make the UK a sort of hub for the crypto business. I would have thought the crypto business would really go away from a place that is highly regulated.
Crypto maybe, but not blockchain, not logistics. So the real applications that the government wants to see are not crypto. So if you're talking about sort of, say, like Unisot and tracking the movement of fish.
Supply chain.
Then that has nothing to do with trading on crypto markets.
But that doesn't really need regulating, does it?
But I mean, it's covered under law. So, I mean, there's no, they self-regulate. They don't go out there touting themselves.
I think when the
money.
government talks about regulating, it really means protecting consumers from being ripped off.
But the difference here is Unisot aren't like many of the ICO people who go out there promising the world and not delivering. So instead of building a company and seeking to increase sales and the old-fashioned way, these other people want to get the money first and then pivot.
I mean, one of the things you said at the workshop was that you wanted to see N-Chain doing a better job of sales and marketing. I mean, so I suppose my question is, I don't really know what goes on at N-Chain, but doesn't Bitcoin technology or BSV sort of just recommend itself to people who understand this